Hi everyone, thanks for coming. So to start my introduction of Wing Young Huie, I will talk a little bit in Mandarin, which makes me special to introduce him. So, okay, it's very hard to say. 下午好，我叫王千飞，我是马里兰艺术学院策展专业2年级的一名学生。今天我很荣幸为大家介绍Wing Young Huie。So what I said in Chinese is, Good afternoon everyone, my name is Fei. I'm a second year student of MFA in curatorial practice. It's my honor to introduce Wing Young Huie, a Chinese-American independent photographer, many of whose projects document the dizzying social, economic, and cultural reality of American society. Much of it centered on the urban core of its home state of Minnesota. Whether in epic public installations or international museum exhibition, he creates up-to-the-minute societal mirrors of who we are, seeking in reveal not only what is hidden, but also what is plainly visible or seldom noticed. His most well-known works, Frogtown 1995, Lake Street USA 2000, and the University Avenue Project 2010, produced by Public Art St. Paul, transformed Twin Cities' urban areas into public photo galleries, reflecting the everyday lives of thousands of its citizens in the midst of some of the most diverse concentrations of the international immigration in the country. The Minneapolis Star-Tribune named Wing the Artist of the Year in 2000, stating Lake Street USA is likely to stand as a milestone in the history of photography and public art. His 5 published books, the University Avenue Project Volume 1, the University Avenue Project Volume 2, Looking for Asian American, and this is a hard word, and Centric Tour, Lake Street US, and Frogtown, Photographs and Conversations in Urban Neighborhood. Lake Street USA was hailed by Minneapolis Star-Tribune as one of the 25 greatest books ever published at Minnesota. And Wing is also the first artist the U.S. Embassy chose to give lectures and show his artwork in China for 3 years, which is a continued project. And his work is shown in more than 12 cities in China. More than 500,000 of people have shown his work. And the cities include Beijing, Harbin, Hangzhou, and Dalian, which is my hometown. Wing's lecture and residency are co-sponsored by MICA's MFA in Curatorial Practice, MFA in Community Arts, and Mixed Medium Theory. Please join me to welcome Wing and give him the warmest applause. Thank you.
Wonderful introduction. Thank you.
There's a light here if you need it.
That's okay.
Thanks.
I really like this to be an informal discussion. I don't think that's a presentation. We'll have time for questions afterwards, but if you want to ask any questions about what you're seeing on the screen or the process, I guess I'd better stay back here. Okay. So I'm going to show you how I started and how I got to where I am today and how my artistic practice has evolved over the years. This is my family. I'm the youngest in my family, youngest of 6. Not everyone in my family was present for this photograph, but there I am, with my hand in my pocket. Every family photograph I have, my brother and sister always had big smiles. In fact, my brother won a smiling contest and actually got a trophy for how well he smiled. And I always had the same bewildered expression on my face. There I am again. We were the only Asian family in our neighborhood in Duluth, Minnesota. Everyone in my family was born in the same small village in China, in Guangdong province. But I was born and raised in Duluth, Minnesota.
Can you hear me?
This way? Let's forget about this.
We can turn on the volume.
Well, it's just that there's a lot of feedback and there's if you can hear me fine, then is that okay? Okay, all right. So we were the only Asian family in our neighborhood, and I was the only Asian student in my school. That's my first grade class picture. Can you pick me up? Do you see me? There I am. Do I look like I stick out? What do you think? Yeah? Kinda? No? Maybe? Okay. Okay. I think that's a complicated question. In a way, I've been trying to answer that question photographically for over 30 years. When do we fit in? When we stick out? Who gets to decide if you stick out? Do you get to decide? Do the people around you decide? How much does popular culture decide? Who sticks out? That's my father. My father emigrated to this country. He was about 19 years old. And like many immigrants, he didn't speak English. Not much of an education. What kind of future was he going to have? But like many Chinese immigrants, he realized he could always open a Chinese restaurant, which is what he ended up doing. So worked 16 hours a day, as a dishwasher, cook, manager. Worked his way up and opened up his own restaurant. And by the time I took this photograph, he was very successful. Oh, I didn't take this photograph. This was taken a year, I think, right around when I was born. He was very successful. But I grew up wanting to be a writer. When I got to the University of Minnesota, I enrolled in the journalism program, print journalism, trained to be a reporter, not a photographer. But when I was a sophomore in college, I took a trip and bought my first camera and for whatever reason, became fascinated by photography, and I thought I wanted to become a photographer. I was already committed to my journalism major. I thought, well, I'm going to teach myself photography, combine my BA in journalism with my self-taught photography skills and become a freelance journalist, which is what I ended up doing. My first published story was on my father. I decided to move back to Duluth and do a story for this newly formed magazine. Now, I didn't know my father very well because he literally worked 7 days a week, never took a day off. And I would only see him, right before I went to school and when he came home like 8 p.m. So I thought it'd be great to do a story on my father. I felt like there were a lot of secrets in my family. How many people feel like there are secrets in your family? Probably true for most families, but I think particularly true for immigrant families. A lot of secrets about why your family left. It wasn't until I was a teenager that I realized that my father had emigrated illegally. Our family had purchased a false identity to get into this country. We had a different last name growing up. Our last name growing up was G, Wing G. There was an amnesty. We were granted permission to stay in the country and have our name changed back to our real name. So it was exciting for me to ask my father questions, to give myself permission to ask my father questions, not as a son, but as a reporter. And then to photograph my father, I felt like I never really looked at him. How many of us become so familiar with those who are closest to us, we don't really see them anymore. I think that was the case with my father. And so, taking this photograph in the house, in the kitchen that I grew up in a way I was really getting to know him in a way I'd never known before. I took this photograph over 35 years ago. Since then, I've photographed thousands of people, and almost everyone that I photographed is a stranger. But in a way, the process is the same as when I photographed my father. Whether I'm photographing something familiar or unfamiliar, I try to see it in a new way. I try to see it in a photographic way. I took a couple of 1 week 2-week photography workshop after graduating from the University of Minnesota. That really is the extent of my formal training in photography. Gary Winogrand, how many people here are familiar with Gary Winogrand? Gary Winogrand, a iconic street photographer in the 70s. So there's me. And I took this photograph during that workshop. I was living in an apartment, and I decided for the first time I would just walk up to someone on the street and ask if I could photograph them. I approached this woman. She said that she lived in a home for women right around the corner. And I asked if I could photograph her there. And so 20 minutes after meeting this woman, I'm photographing her in her intimate surroundings in her home. That was fascinating for me to do. So I started giving myself assignments. And one of my assignments was on what people do for a living. What does this person do for a living? You'd be surprised how many people think he's a cook. They don't really look at the entire photograph. But I thought it'd be interesting to photograph the county coroner. And I just called him up. I said, I'm doing a photography essay on what people do for a living. And he said, yeah, sure, come on down. I went there in the middle of the week, and there weren't any bodies. He said, well, you got to come on a Monday, because we get a lot of business after the weekend. So I went down there, and it was shocking. I had never seen a dead body before. And this dead body, the chest cavity was pulled open, and the skin was pulled off his face. And it was shocking, but once I started photographing, then it's just a matter of trying to understand where the photograph is. I realized that there was a light source above his head that would cause a lens flare that would act as a sort of halo for this angel of death. Started working for magazines and newspapers. So first they would hire me to write the story, and then I would ask if I could take the photographs. And then eventually built up my photography portfolio and focused on that. This is the free weekly in the Twin Cities. It was I did a photo essay on McDonough homes. It's an area where there were a lot of refugees moving in from Southeast Asia. And this guy was Cambodian. You see all these tattoos that he had, playing this game that's kind of like bocce ball. And I was very conscious of calling this the Americans, because I felt that my own family, a lot of Chinese did not consider themselves Americans, and weren't considered American by, say, Minnesota. So my mom, when I was growing up, would always tell me, don't marry an American girl. What does she mean by that? She said, Mom, you live in America, you're an American. And she just laughed at me. Never considered yourself American. 30 years in this country, she never learned to speak English. Who gets to decide who is more American? Who gets to decide what is Main Street? So this is how I made a living. I was a working photojournalist. At first, I did any kind of photography to get paid. I was a wedding photographer, I worked for a modeling agency, but the bulk of what I did was photojournalism, editorial photographer. I worked at some point for just about every magazine or publication in the Twin Cities. This is my first project. I give a lot of lectures and workshops. It's really how I make a living as an independent artist. And often it's from corporations, corporate executives, to sixth graders. Often what I do is I ask, what do you see? Before I give any context to the photograph. Often in high schools, I'll say, how many people here have no idea what, I've never seen this lawn ornament. Most high school students have never seen this kind of lawn ornament. Let me ask you, how many people here have never seen this kind of lawn ornament? Never. Okay. How many people here are not quite sure what to think? How many people think it's weird, but they're not quite sure why?
How many people think it's offensive? How many people think it's just a law and order? What's the big deal? All the different presentations, I've heard all different kinds of answers. Some will say, well, it's offensive because of blackface. Okay, well, they know something about history, and they'll explain blackface. Or someone will say, I don't see what the big deal of it. It's just a law and order, but he's fishing. Is there something wrong with fishing? Or someone will say, hey, my parents have one. And I always kind of wondered about it, but I was never quite sure what to think about it. So what I stress is that there's no right, wrong or right answer, no wrong or right way to interpret a photograph. But what you see reflects how you look at life. Because everyone sees something different, because everyone has different life experiences. So once people say what they have to say, and people have said some pretty things to each other that people go, wow, I can't believe you said that. But I try to foster an atmosphere where everyone really tries to say what they really think. And then after we have a discussion about that, then I will tell a little bit of the context. So I was doing a project on black memorabilia, which is a genre of collectibles, ranging from Aunt Jemima cookie jars to slave artifacts. For the most part, these are depictions of black people through a white filter. This is how white America has looked at black people. And some of this stuff is very expensive, and a lot of it is very controversial. There are celebrity collectors, like Oprah's a collector. Why would she collect it? Because she wants to be reminded of how America has looked at black people. So I was working with Kim Hines, who is an African-American playwright who collects black memorabilia. She gave a performance at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts major museum on why she collects and what does this really have to do with black people. She gave a performance on stage, and then I photographed private collections. I went to antique stores, and I projected my images behind her while she gave this performance. So I saw this lawn ornament. I was driving around first-tier suburb of Minneapolis, saw the lawn ornament, photographed it later at night because they had a spotlight with colored gels so you could see it at night. And I knocked on the door, and I told these folks what I was doing. I was doing a project of an exhibition on black memorabilia for the Minneapolis Institute of Arts. I explained it. Can I take a picture? They said, sure. And then I asked if there's a story behind it. And the wife said that she's always wanted one, and her sister got her one for her birthday. And then she added also that they had adopted a black son and wanted to bring some black culture into his life. Now what do you think? Like, what's going through your mind? Like, what do you think?
I'm just like, are you serious? Like that's the picture that you want your ex.
All the things you could put on your front lawn. Why would you choose this? Why would they choose this? Because what?
It's through the white filter.
It's through a white filter. Therefore, what do you think of them?
Very ignorant.
Very ignorant. Okay. Anyone else?
Not educated about.
Not educated?
culture or like, yeah, not educated, not looking to look beyond that.
Okay. Anyone else? Yeah. They need to. Okay. All right. Okay. Anyone else? Any different viewpoint?
Makes me wonder about that son.
I asked them. I said, "What does your son think?" And he was a teenager now. And they said, "Well, he never said too much about it." Anyone else? What about their intentions?
I think it's honest though.
It's honest. Why is it honest?
Because their ignorance is honest.
Okay. They were trying to do what they thought was best. They had good intentions, right? They adopted him. How many people here have good intentions? How many people here have done something stupid when it comes to matters of race, identity, culture, so on, right? So I think the question is really not how ignorant they are. The question is, how are we like them? We are formed by the same culture that forms them. Is it really hard to believe that they would think this is okay?
No.
We live in America. How many people have poured Aunt Jemima syrup on their pancakes? How many people have really no idea who Aunt Jemima is, except it's this woman on the syrup bottle? How many people here have seen Gone with the Wind? Okay, Gone with the Wind is arguably America's most beloved, iconic movie. And in this movie, an African American actress portrays the mammy, this maid, this jolly, subservient, good cook. And it's the first time an African American actor has won an Oscar. How many people here have seen The Help? That's Gone with the Wind, updated for this generation. Now it's a feel-good movie. And in this movie, another African American actress was nominated for an Oscar. It shows you kind of limited how many roles are available, Oscar-worthy roles available for African American actors. How many people realize that they were perpetuating probably one of the most pervasive stereotypes we have of black women when they're pouring syrup on their pancakes? And this is an easy one if you knew the history. If you just look it up on Wikipedia, you will see that throughout the years, Aunt Jemima has gotten thinner and whiter. Now we have Aunt Jemima Light. You can do a sociological study probably on this photograph with grandma's molasses, black strap molasses, rare rabbit, and Lund Swedish pancake mix. There's an early depiction of Aunt Jemima. So what are all the other things out there that are forming how you think about yourself, how you think about the world around you? How much of how we think about all of that stuff has to do with images, all the images that you've consumed in your lifetime. So my first, so after making a living as a freelance photographer, as an independent journalist, I started doing my own projects. I actually got fired from one of my jobs because it was clear I lost interest in what I was doing. And that's when I started my first project, Frogtown. I was tired of trying to illustrate some art director or editor's idea, and I wanted to do the kind of photography that made me want to become a photographer in the first place, which was looking at iconic black and white documentary photographers. So I decided to photograph the Frogtown neighborhood in St. Paul. Frogtown was close to where I lived, and I didn't know Frogtown very well, but there were dozens and dozens of Asian restaurants along one border of Frogtown, mostly Southeast Asian, because at that time a quarter of the population was Hmong. Anyone here, how many people here are not familiar with Hmong people? Okay, so Hmong were originally from China. They migrated to Laos. Then the U.S. military involved them during the Vietnam War. And when we pulled out of Vietnam, we brought a lot of the Hmong over as refugees. And so Minnesota has the largest Hmong community in the United States. There's only one movie ever been made by Hollywood that has a Hmong person in it. That was by Clint Eastwood, Gran Torino. And if you're a Hmong, you know that movie because it's the only one. And then you have to question how much of how they portray Hmong has to do with reality. And you would probably think there's a wide gap between perception and reality and how they portray Hmong in that movie. But Frogtown, like many urban neighborhoods, has a reputation. It's the kind of neighborhood it seems like you only hear about on the news when something bad happens. Drugs, gang, so on. How much does the media drive the reputation of neighborhoods? So I wanted to understand the realities behind those news stories. And so I would just walk up and down the street with all my camera gear, and I would say, I am a professional photographer, I'm an artist, I'm doing a community exhibition photographing everyday life in your neighborhood. A lot of people say no. A lot of people say yes though. Every once in a while someone will call the police. But there's always people who say yes. So I would just walk up and down the street and introduce myself to people and ask if I could photograph them.
4 snakes in this one. 1, 2, 3, 4. How many people here, if you saw this, you might be a little scared. You might walk on the other side of the street. Right? How many people would go, cool, I want to talk to them? So, I have my own preconceptions, my own biases, deeply embedded, but when I'm walking down the street, everything's material. When I have a camera around my neck, I'm always challenged by what I thought, and then when I actually talk to the person. So generally I would say I am not looking for posed pictures. I'm just going to hang out with you and take a lot of pictures, if you have time. So this family, I thought, this is kind of interesting, this is interesting. I took about 40 photographs. It wasn't until this young woman raised a baby that everything fell into place. This pyramid of bodies, triangles everywhere, everyone connected, but yet everyone looking in different directions. At one point this guy wanted to leave. I said, you cannot leave, you're very important to this photograph. So it's interesting to be able to just meet people and ask if I could photograph them at home. At first, when I did this project, I would avoid any teenager in a baggy pants and a hooded jacket. I thought, oh, they could be gangbangers. But once I got comfortable with the neighborhood, I realized I could talk to anyone. They said no. I said, fine, just keep moving. Does anyone see anything a little unusual in this photograph? What's that? A lot of Hmong are animists, believe in the spirit of animals. When a kid gets sick, they bring in a shaman. This is the kid who's sick. They believe that the animal spirits help bolster the spirit of someone who's sick. At this point, the pig is alive. Every once in a while, it squeals. It's wrapped in a garbage bag because they didn't want the neighbors to know. He performs a ceremony for about an hour. He has a bowl of water. He speaks, he chants. He's speaking a spiritual language. Hmong don't even understand it. People come in and out. This is a regular thing. People do this all the time. Then they take the pig, they take it to the kitchen, they slit its throat, collected its blood in a bowl. Then they took the pig to a slaughterhouse and came back and had a big feast. How many people think this is kind of weird? What is exotic for you is someone else's normal. Why would people use blood? They said, well, Laos, when you kill an animal, you use everything. You use the blood in the cooking, right? I noticed that men would take spoonfuls of blood. I said, why did they do that? And I think it's kind of a macho thing. So I did the same thing. It's horrible. It took me days to get the taste in my mouth. Eating blood. How many people here have been to First Communion? What's that about? Drinking the blood of Christ. I think if you look at everything, especially religion, it's all a little weird. But what is normal to you, what is exotic to you, is someone else's normal. Who gets to say what is normal? Who gets to say what is exotic? Like two halves of a heart. It's interesting to me not what the photograph is about, but what it suggests. That's why I really believe there's no right or wrong interpretation. If a photograph is very suggestive, but what it suggests is open to interpretation, then to me that's a good photograph. Everything revolves around this tree, this merry-go-round. Black and white car, black and white bicycle, black and white pants, shoes, like the bark on the tree. It's not that they're just friends. They are so close, they mirror each other. Even the way they hold their hands are the same. Again, I don't believe there's any right or wrong interpretation. But to me, this photograph suggests a central societal question, which is when are we different and when are we the same? To these two boys, does it matter? Is that something that society will teach them? Kind of same photograph, but different. Which one is grumpier? So my first solo exhibition was in Frogtown, and I decided to have the exhibition outdoors. I'd never seen a photography exhibit outdoors. I said, well, why not? I wanted it to be accessible. So I just pinned photographs that I made in my darkroom, RC photographs, resin-coated photographs, if you're photographers, and just pinned them to blocks of styrofoam. And then shrink wrapped. It looks like glass, but it's just the kind of stuff you get at a hardware store, insulate with your windows in the winter using a blow dryer. Very fragile, very accessible. 173 photographs pinned to 10 blocks of styrofoam. When I told people what I was going to do, people said, that's stupid. That's Frogtown. Be torn down, be vandalized the next day. But it was up for a month, 24/7. There was so much media publicity because of the unusual nature of the exhibit that thousands of people came out to see it. All the grass was worn down by the end of the exhibit. Virtually intact when we took it down. It brought a lot of people from the neighborhood to see the exhibit. It also brought a lot of people from outside of the neighborhood who had never come to a place like Frogtown because they were afraid to. When I chose this photograph for the cover of my book, a couple people said, oh, you can't put that on the cover. I said, why not? One person says, well, it looks kind of scary. Really, what's scary about it? Someone says, well, it looks like somebody tortured. Because you know, the Vietnam War wasn't that long ago. So the Vietnam War was over 30 years ago. Are you saying that all those images coming back from Vietnam in Life magazine, CBS News, Time magazine, so powerful that 30 years later, that's the filter through which you see this photograph. You think Viet Cong. When I show this in schools, I ask kids what they think of it. Sometimes a student will say, oh, he looks like he's sleeping. Another student will say, oh, he looks like he's praying. Another kid will say, oh, he looks like he's high. I think most people think of a photograph as like a window into the world through this photographer's eyes. I think a photograph can be just as much, if not more, a mirror. Because people see only what their life experiences enable them to see. People see only what they're capable of seeing. People see what they want to see. Interesting to me that there's so many different interpretations of this young man getting his hair cut. Now, we've been in many wars. Each war we're in, photographs come back from the battlefield and shape how we think of the enemy. How do you think America has been shaped? How do you think you've been shaped by all of the images coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan? What does America think of Muslims? Again, who gets to say who is more American? Do you get to say? Does popular culture drive it? Also photographed in small towns throughout Minnesota. A lot of how people think about Minnesota is driven by our ideas of small towns. But small towns these days look pretty much like Frogtown. In this town, a Laotian family moved to this town of 800 people. Moved there, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago. Now a quarter of the population is Laotian. Her family has lived there for many generations. She goes out with his son. She's like a member of the family now. And then, after doing Frogtown, I decided to do a larger project, but instead of one neighborhood, photograph the many neighborhoods connected by a singular street, Lake Street, which is probably the most well-known street in Minneapolis. It connects all different kinds of neighborhoods, from Uptown, which is the trendiest enclave in the Twin Cities, to some of the poorest neighborhoods.
Lake Street is really a microcosm of who we are. It's everything that can be found about urban living can be found somewhere on Lake Street. Lake Street is our future. Lake Street is who we are. Kid dancing on ATM machine. I moved into the neighborhood to do this project. Was walking home, saw this kid dancing on ATM machine. This is another photograph where I will just simply say to the audience, what do you see? I showed this to a high school class last week. Right away, a kid says, African American kid, he says, that guy's up to no good. I said, what guy? He said, that guy. Why do you think he's up to no good? Well, he looks kind of sketchy, he's got his hands in his pockets, he's smoking a cigarette, he's casing out those old ladies. He's going to snatch that purse. I said, really? Now, how many people think that? Half the class raised their hand. I asked the other half, well, what do you think? One person says, well, looks like they're maybe waiting for a bus. Or someone says, and I don't think they can see around the corner. Or one person, or a sixth grader said, he looks like he's lonely. He looks like he's lonely too. Or someone would say, really kind of angry, they say, how do you know that those little white ladies aren't going to rob him? So I asked this class, after everyone gave their opinion, I said, then who's right? We have quite divergent opinions. Who's right? One student said, well, no one's right. It's just a photograph. You don't really know. That's true. But how you look at photographs shows you how you look at life. You're walking down the street, what are you going to think? Then I asked, how many people thought maybe he's up to no good, and then thought that's not a good way to think? More people raised their hand. How much of how you think about the world and the world around you has to do with images from popular culture, and how much does it have to do with direct experience? How many movies have you seen where the African American guy is the hero? Well, let's not include Will Smith. How many movies have you seen where the African American guy is the bad guy? Too many to count. Or if it's a scary movie, he gets killed off early. Or at best, he's a sidekick, the best friend. All those movies that you've seen, how much do they form how you would look at this photograph? How many movies have you seen where the Asian guy is the hero? And it's not a kung fu movie. How many movies have you seen where the Asian guy is the nerd, the geek, never gets the girl? Or more recently, the crazy naked guy who jumps out of a trunk? How many people here have seen The Hangover? So popular, they made 3 of them. And in this movie, there's an Asian guy. The crazy naked Asian guy who jumps out of a trunk, right? Probably the most well-known Asian character in a Hollywood movie in the last 5 years. What does that tell you about how Hollywood looks at Asian men? Again, how much of how we think of each other has to do with images, and how much of those images are formed by pop culture, and who makes all that stuff? So I would just walk up and down the street, as I did in Frogtown, and photograph people. Met her. This was an area in Uptown where she liked to hang out, kind of hide. Backed away and saw him coming. I think a lot of my photographs are about fashion. Why do people wear what they wear?
What year are we up to with these? Where are we in
Yeah,
your
so Frogtown was 1993 to 95, and then Lake Street was 97 to 2000. And my first couple of projects were all black and white. I thought black and white was more artful, color was distracting, you could see the people better in black and white, you could see emotions better. Also, tape recorded conversations that I had with people, included their words alongside the photograph. Back in Egypt, father was a teacher. He taught geography, science, and math. He also worked in a chemistry lab. Right now he's a dishwasher. For my father, everything is good. He's learning English at the Layman Center. He'd like to get a better paying job, but his English needs to be better. He hopes someday to teach like he did in Egypt. Our father is very religious. He prays 5 times a day. Every day he reads the Quran. I think he's even more religious after we came here because he's afraid that we will forget about our language, culture, and traditions. It's hard for us because he wants us to cover our heads. It's the Muslim tradition. He wants us to cover most of our body and not wear pants. We have a lot of arguments about it. In Egypt, we had to wear scarves and long dresses. Everybody had to wear them. But we don't wear them now because we are in America. Everyone can wear whatever they want. I think that's good. I want to be different and have my own way of life. I'm not very religious. I don't pray. I do a lot of activities in school. I want to be a heart surgeon. I want to be famous. I like new fashions. My father wants us to be only with people of our own race, our own culture. He doesn't want us to be with people different than us. None of my friends are Egyptian. They are from all over. I have American friends, Chinese, Asian, from all over the world. It's really fun. I really like school. When I go, I don't want to leave. I don't even want to come home. I like learning. I'm on the National Honor Society. My GPA is 4.0. We'd never guess all this looking at this photograph. Pizzanella. It was hot that day. She was perspiring. I thought I'd use a flash so that she'd look more like the doll. Which is more exotic? For this exhibition, since it was going to be shown in public, I felt that there's a responsibility to showing photographs in public. So this is the only photograph that I chose not to show in this exhibit. It's never been exhibited. Although I may exhibit it along with other photographs that I thought were controversial. Yeah, and I think, say I walk up to you on the street, I tell you what I'm doing, several years pass, you walk down the street and you see a big photograph of yourself. What does that do for you? What happens? Some of these guys still contact me. In 1997, I took this photograph. I just ran into one last week. Middle school graduation. Rented a limo for their middle school graduation. These are all students at Roosevelt High School, public school. For some reason, the city of Minneapolis sent all of the arriving Somali students to the same school. They did the same with Southeast Asian when they first started arriving. All of these students are Muslim, pray 5 times a day. Problematic in a public school. They would pray under stairwells, by the lockers. And so a Christian church, Episcopalian church across the street, gave them this room to pray. So they prayed at Friday for mosque during the lunch hour. This is Lake Street, 21A. I got to know her, photographed her for about a half a day. It wasn't until she crossed the street that I thought this was the most interesting photograph. Doesn't make much money.
collects aluminum cans, goes through dumpsters and garbage. McDonald's in the background. Actually, you can't see that, but Armageddon is here. They're advertising the movie Armageddon. And then on the other side, they're advertising the movie Mulan. And there she is at home. Message from Taco Bell. This guy, I took this about 1999, and I'm going to be showing you a project that I did 10 years later. And he walked into that project out the street, and he says, he just took one look at me. I recognized him right away. I hadn't seen him since then. He just looked at me and he said, "You're still doing it." And then I wanted to, get in a conversation with him, like, "What have you been doing?" And he just turned around and walked away. So I had an exhibition at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, internationally known museum. It was very exciting for me to have my photographs displayed at such a prestigious museum. I didn't go to art school. My family, as far as I know, never set foot in a museum. And it was an incredible experience for me. But then the following year, we put those photographs on the street. We approached 300 businesses along 6 miles of Lake Street and asked if we could put my photographs of everyday life in their windows. 150 businesses said no. All of the businesses in trendy uptown said no. In fact, they got a little annoyed. We are not Lake Street. We are uptown. Meaning Lake Street is the ghetto. We are uptown. Why do we want to be associated with your exhibit? It took us a month to put up close to 700 photographs in 150 businesses along 6 miles and turned Lake Street into a 6-mile gallery, museum, family album. And it took us the month of June, to put up those photographs. And by the end of the month, there was so much media publicity that uptown businesses started calling me, wanting photographs in their windows. And we obliged. We put them in bus stops. The one on the left is mine. How much of how we think about the world has to do with this, and how much does it have to do with this? Largest photographs were on former Sears building. It was empty at the time. We didn't have any explanations or didactics. My name wasn't anywhere. Only the words of the people accompanied the photographs. So it was up to anyone walking by, anyone driving by, to decide for themselves why this was here. I remember one person thought it was a memorial service to all the people that died on Lake Street. Another person thought it was a memorial service for the photographer who died. I overheard a couple of teenagers who thought it was a Nike thing. We put notebooks in the different coffee shops along Lake Street and invited people to write their comments. Here's what one person wrote who did not sign their name. We put their words on the back of the book. I still don't know who this person is. Where art is not afraid to look into the eyes of us regular poor folks just living our lives. This art comes down from the pretentious, self-conscious, and exclusive upper-class realm and becomes community art. Art with a purpose, humane. These are the pictures you'll never see in Nike ads or car ads or perfume ads. These are the majority of Americans picking up their broken identities and trying to scrape together a living, a culture, an identity, a life. Most of the images we see are advertisements trying to sell us a euphoria and prestige we could never achieve. We look around us and are disappointed. We struggle but don't measure up. These photos show us real and valuable just as we are. They are sad because they aren't the perfect images of others we're used to seeing. They are empowering for the same reason. Thanks for these images and a chance to respond. Peace. Then after that installation, where I photographed thousands of people, I decided it'd be interesting to focus
on one person. I met Shalimar Flying Horse at an arts workshop. She was 15 years old. I was planning for an exhibition in the Phillips neighborhood at Franklin Artworks, which is, Phillips neighborhood is home to the largest urban Native American population in the country. I asked if I could photograph her for 3 months. I photographed her at home, with her family, with friends, at her birthday, on a bus, at school, with her boys. Part of the idea was to try to experience another person's reality. I realized you cannot really experience another person's reality. The problem, I think, is that people think they can. They relate their own drama, their own tragedy to someone else's, and I think we often come up short. In this exhibition, besides my photographs of Shalimar, I gave her a video camera, and she videotaped a typical week in her life. And then we included things from her home, her family photographs, her own bedroom mirror, where she stuck a lot of her snapshots, and these are hers. And then we also included her poems, written on a chalkboard. This next project was a 9-month road trip around the United States. I called it an ethnocentric tour, trying to think about what are my own cultural filters. What are the cultural filters of someone who was born and raised in Duluth, Minnesota? As I told you, when I was growing up, I was the only Asian student in school. I was the only Asian student until 11th grade, and there's other Asian kids showed up at my school. Now there's 2 Asian boys at Duluth Central High School, and I avoided this kid. I don't think at the time I realized I was avoiding someone just because I think they look like me. It wasn't until I took this trip 20 years later, more than 20 years later, that I started thinking about this kid and why would I avoid someone just because I think they look like me. What I realized was that we are what we see. And as I looked around me, my classroom, but more importantly, as I started watching TV, movies, the media, I didn't see very many Asian kids. I forgot what I looked like. It's not like you grow up with a mirror in front of you. The people around you, and more importantly, popular culture is your mirror. It took a long time for me to realize that popular culture is a very distorted mirror. And so when I saw this kid, I was really seeing myself for the first time. I thought, this kid sticks out, therefore I stick out, and that made me feel uncomfortable. So driving around the United States, thinking about these questions, really what are my own cultural filters? The only non-immigrant in my family who'd never even been to China, born and raised in Duluth, Minnesota. How do I look at the world? I was in Baker, Montana, small town, demolition derby. Never been to a demolition derby before. All these cars, they crash into each other, and the last car standing wins. Whole town came out to see this. I'm looking around, I see the one Asian guy in town, right? And I think, he looks like he fits in. He's been there actually for like 20 years. He looks like he fits in. He's got the jeans, he's got that pocket thing. He looks like he's from there. But then I look at it, I think, he looks like he's also photoshopped in. Is that kind of the way it looks like to you? And I think, why do I think that? Is that the way I look like when I walk around Minnesota? Do I look like I'm photoshopped in? Jacksonville, Florida. Large Vietnamese community on the other side of Lake Pontchartrain from New Orleans. This is all firecracker paper. Done a lot of small projects that weren't public art exhibits. I did a photography residency in Milwaukee and photographed people with Alzheimer's.
That's her when she was younger. That's her husband. Alzheimer's for 10 years, doesn't know who he is anymore, but he still takes care of her. Still lives with them. Every once in a while, he'll still kiss her. He says, whenever he kisses, the dog barks. Same thing, married for 60 years. She developed Alzheimer's, doesn't remember him anymore, but his daughter and he take care of her. And every day he plays the air flute for her. Did a project in an area called the Springs in California, next to Sonoma, which is next to Napa. Very wealthy wine community. But on the other side of the tracks is the Springs, where a lot of migrants live. Then had an installation along their main highway and put photographs on buildings and windows. And then started doing more color. Everything I shoot is film. For this project, I decided to use a medium format camera, a 645 MICA. Photographs of people waiting in public. I had a sociologist, a bunch of sociologists. What do you call a bunch of sociologists? A gaggle sociologist. So over at my gallery, and they were convinced that this was a drug deal. And these are actually day laborers, which is a bit underground in Minnesota, but in many states it's pretty well known. People looking for work. And they would congregate in front of a Kmart on Lake Street every day. And then I did a project on adoptive families. Two half-brothers, same birth mother, different birth fathers, adopted by these two women. Single father and his son. Single mother and her daughter. And there she is in high school. Then 10 years later, after I did Lake Street, I decided to do another project somewhat similar to Lake Street, in that I photographed 6 miles of University Avenue in St. Paul. Minneapolis, St. Paul, sister cities, right next to each other. But this time I'm photographing in color and black and white, but the same thing, putting photographs in windows. For this exhibit, we were able to upscale the exhibit, bigger photographs. But also in this project, I decided to do something different. I gave people chalkboards. With my previous projects, I had interviewed people, included their words alongside the photograph. With this project, I gave people chalkboards and asked them a series of questions. So here we have a music store with our cultural icons, Bruce Springsteen, Johnny Cash, Prince, and then a Somali man with the word lunch written on chalkboard. Because one of the questions what is your favorite word? He was going to a school learning English for adults. Unusual to see photographs that large in public that aren't advertising, trying to sell you something. The exhibit was up for 6 months in the year 2010. This is the only photograph that remains, a 20 by 30 foot photograph on the side of a public library. And there is a close-up.
What do you do with the pictures after the exhibition?
Well, the ones that are inside the buildings, it's a process called textured vinyl. It peels off, and so you can't save the photograph. But in both exhibitions, on Lake Street and University Avenue, but particularly for Lake Street, we auctioned off the photographs to help pay for the exhibit. I still went into debt. But for University Avenue, I was working with an organization to help subsidize the exhibit. But again, we auctioned them off. And then we had, what was also different about this exhibit is I wanted to have a projection space. So we took over a former used car dealership lot in the middle of University Avenue, across from a Walmart, and dropped down shipping containers and put in a 40-foot screen so that every twilight, 5 nights a week for 6 months, we had revolving images accompanied by music from 40 local musicians that we worked with. So about 5,000 people came to this space. We had chairs and so on. But as I told one of the classes, I wanted to make this, it was more of a spectacle. I thought it was going to be more interactive. I thought we were going to put like tables and people were going to bring card games and people would hang out. But that's not what happened. It ended up being more people were just experiencing it rather than talking to each other. And so in this exhibit, I gave people chalkboards. And I thought, well, what would people write? So I came up with a series of questions that I thought were not easy to answer, but that would elicit a wide array of thoughts, dreams, wishes, fears. Questions like, what are you? What advice would you give to a stranger? How do you think other people see you? And then what don't they see? What advice would you give to a stranger? What's your favorite word? Describe an incident that helped define you. And how have you been affected by race? And then after asking these questions, sometimes they write their answer down or they would just tell me their answers. And I thought of this as just a way of having a conversation. And then after we're done, I thought, what was the most interesting, revealing thing that you said? And I would suggest that they write that down. But ultimately, they could write whatever they want. Sometimes what they said to me is not what they wanted to write. So it's interesting what people chose to write. Or sometimes I would ask people to ask each other the questions. She's actually, and it was interesting because you get a glimpse of what the person is about, but still open-ended. You could still read into what they write. She's actually talking about she's part Native American. And this is a high school, and he talks about being gay and coming out in high school, how difficult it is to come out in high school. I'm a jealous person. I don't think I'm pretty enough. This was at another high school. I said, I'm doing this exhibition. I'm going to put photographs along University Avenue. Who wants to be involved? There's a line of students. And so I was photographing, and she kept on bugging me. She said, when's it my turn? When's it my turn? Finally, it's her turn. This is what she ends up writing. This is the first photograph I took. She wanted to look this way. This is the expression she chose. Then she's all excited. She's done. And she said, can I get a copy of the picture? I said, no problem. I'm going to give the pictures, all the photographs, to your principal. And she got this horrified look on her face. She said, oh no, then everyone will see. I said, don't you understand what I'm doing? I'm going to put this in a window on University Avenue, and tens of thousands of people are going to see it. Then she goes, oh, okay, that's okay. What happened? She didn't want to reveal something about herself, a vulnerability to her fellow students. But she was willing to show the world. How much does that explain her generation? So after doing the University Avenue project, the following year, I was part of Northern Spark, which is, it was originated in Europe, and someone brought it to Minnesota, and there were over 100 artists doing public installation outdoors in one night. And so this is 2011, and I decided to install ping pong tables because I wanted something that was more interactive than what I did on University Avenue. I thought, ping pong, why not? I knew I was also looking for a new gallery space, and I wanted to deploy ping pong in my gallery space. And so this was right by the University of Minnesota in a neighborhood on the West Bank where it's the largest Somali community in Minnesota. And so we had 10 ping pong tables, and I projected 1,300 images from my archive. I called it a ping pong retrospective. And from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m., we projected 1,300 images, and hundreds of people came and played ping pong with each other that didn't know each other. We didn't have an open table till 2:30 a.m. Then we had a lull for about half hour, and then a lot of people showed up after that. Not quite sober, but. Then I've done workshops. I did a workshop with the Philadelphia Mural Arts Program, and so I worked with their youth in different organizations, and so these are all photographs that they took. And they would photograph each other. The whole idea is that you photograph someone, you have a chalkboard conversation with someone you don't know, and then the both of you go out in the street and talk to someone, a stranger. So these are their photographs in a public building, a public service building in downtown Philadelphia. There's me in front of my gallery, the third place. So I opened this space 2.5 years ago. It's on the corner of 38th in Chicago and South Minneapolis. And I had a gallery for 9 years, but I never promoted my gallery because I was working on my project. So I decided to have a gallery that seemed more like an extension of my public art projects, called the third place. Third place is a sociological term. First place is where you live, second place is where you work, and then there's a lot of social theory about what makes a contemporary communal third place. We have an event every once a month. We bring in different artists and all different mediums, from abstract painters to poets to filmmakers. The whole idea is that it's very informal. And how do you have an art-driven event that is about wine and cheese and small talk? How do you do something where the neighborhood would want to be involved, where you don't have to necessarily be interested in that particular genre, but would have fun in coming? So we try to have, we push the artists to be interactive and to reveal something vulnerable about themselves and to do something that they haven't done before, and followed by ping pong and a karaoke lounge. Shortly after we opened the gallery, there was a stabbing death right in front of my gallery. And that night, a vigil grew. And hard to know what really happened, but the official story is that it's a Bloods area. It's been Bloods for 2 generations. Bloods wear the color red, and a young black man was walking down the street in blue shoes. 2 Bloods came up after him, made him take off his shoes. Kid was walking away. They wouldn't stop. They kept after him, and the kid who had his shoes taken away took out a knife and stabbed one of the Bloods to death right in front of my gallery. So we invited people into the gallery and ended up getting to know them and photographing them, and then we had a gathering at my gallery. The neighborhood was traumatized. People were very upset. She is she's a relative of the young man who died, and there were people that were friends of his. And it was very interesting because we had someone facilitate it who knows a lot about urban violence. And he tried to frame this as, if you think of this as a gang thing, you might not think it's your problem. If you think of this as a cycle of violence, you don't know who you interact with. And I talked to some of the gang members, and they said, why don't you come to this thing? And one said, I could, but if things got out of hand, it could get ugly. Because I'm just gonna, I said, it would be nice. He said, it'd be nice if I could walk down the street and look people in the eye, because we want your businesses to do well. So people got it at each other. It was very volatile. People were saying to the facilitator, you're making excuses for them. We need more cops. Other people were saying, let's try to understand what's happening here. And then the youth who knew him were very eloquent about what it's like to live in that kind of culture. So, and then these last photographs are a project that I did in my own neighborhood on Chicago Avenue, part of an Arts in Chicago project. Pillsbury House received an Art Place grant, $250,000 grant, commissioned 20 art installations. And so I did one. And so one of the ideas I had is called We Are the Other. And so what I'm doing is I'm photographing people, neighbors who don't really know each other. He's the barber across the street, here's his customer, and they engage in a chalkboard conversation. He ends up writing, I'm a fair-minded person, I wish the world would do the same. Then I asked the barber, who's someone that he doesn't really know in the neighborhood? He said, the coffee shop, he doesn't drink coffee. So he went over there, and then she's the owner, and they engaged in a conversation. He wrote on his chalkboard about coming to the United States and not having any money, and now he owns 2 barbershops. Then I asked her, and she said, the guy who runs the auto body shop. Lucky for me, they're both wearing black. Then I asked him, and he said, I don't care who you pair me up with. So I said, oh, great, I know this knitting store down the street. He would never go in there. It's interesting, how he's completely different persona. People think I'm intimidating, but once they get to know me, I'm really a nice guy. And then I asked him, and he didn't care, so I just waited out in front of his store, and she walked by. She had never been inside his store. And it's interesting because he wrote, I have prejudice that needs to be faced and overcome. But looking at the photograph, you would never guess that they had just met. That also helped me photographically if we're both wearing the same kind of boots. They look like a couple. Then I had people who didn't know each other again. I met him. They said, let's walk down the street. Met her. They didn't know each other. And then they engaged in a conversation. They wrote their favorite word. Same thing with a grocery store owner and one of his customers. Then I also decided to do what I call neighbor diptychs. Approach business, residential, or faith neighbors who didn't know each other and photograph them in each other's spaces. So you don't really know who's who, whose space it is, and so on. He's the barber, this is his barber shop, he owns the corner grocery store. I tried to pick a background that was somewhat similar. I met him, that's his place. He said, there's this family that lives across the street. I don't know them. I wave to them every once in a while. So let's go down there and knock on the door. We went down there. He answered the door. And then this guy is his roommate. And then I did this with the World Outreach Church, the evangelical church. This is their space, and then this is the Baha'i Center, which is a block away, and they have never been in each other's spaces. They didn't even know each other existed. What, Baha'i Center? What is Baha'i? And then I decided to do a concept photographing people on the street, but having them do something that was something that would connect them. So I thought I would tell a joke and photograph people at the punchline. What did the 0 say to the 8? Oh, I'm sorry, I blew it.
Nice belt.
Yeah, nice belt.
Want to take your picture?
And so then we installed photographs in windows, but the most interesting venue was the corner grocery store, where we put 37 photographs on the ceiling. And then I have the installation that's traveling throughout China, traveling through for 3 years, and there's me in China. This is my first time in China. Right, this is 3 years ago. And coming from a place, Minnesota, where inside I feel like everyone, but I feel like I stick out once in a while, to a place where I look like everyone, and I really feel like a foreigner. I don't speak the language, and so on. So, and this is at your college. Mm-hmm. Right? There's a poster of me. I have no idea what that says. But I know it's about me, and that's my photograph. So I gave presentations to Tsinghua University, a number of universities. There were all different kinds of reactions, but probably the most interesting was a student at Tsinghua University got up and said, but you are showing us, and he said in English, but you are showing us images of what America is really like, not the rich paradise that we know it is. Trying to reconcile their idea of America with the America that I am showing them, instead of the Hollywood America. And then I'm doing a project on Chinese identity. It's called Chineseness. I had students from China visiting Minnesota. And so they came to my gallery, and I decided to use a chalkboard and I asked them 3 questions. First question is, what is the Chinese dream? Second question, what is the American dream? And then, what is your dream? Chinese dream, rebuild the old dynasty. American dream, rich and sexy. My dream, live as an artist. Chinese dream, to be a developed country. American dream, rule the world. I want to be a postgraduate student. And then I did this with Chinese American students who grew up in America in Philadelphia. Here's their checklist to do for mom. The only ones checked is go to college. The other ones, become a doctor, get married, have babies. For me, live a happy life. And so what I'm going to do next, but I haven't actually photographed it yet, would be to, I'm going to photograph sort of like a what if. What if my family had never left China? What if I was born and raised and still lived in China? Or what if, for here, what if I turned out the way my mom really wanted me to turn out? Marry a Chinese woman, have Chinese kids, or what if I would end up owning a Chinese restaurant, or I'd become an engineer, or so on. So I'm photographing Chinese men about my age, and then in their various circumstances, and then when we'll both decide on which picture we like the best, then I'll give them the camera, I'll wear their clothes, and then they'll photograph me. And I'll do this here, then I'll do this in China. And then the handout that you got, we created a newspaper, and I did a project, again, through ArtPlace. Intermedia Arts received a $250,000 grant, pairing artists with urban planners. And so I paired up with Ashley Hansen, and we created these different community engagement concepts. And part of the idea is that, and a lot of these we gave chalkboards. Well, we have to log in to see it. But part of the idea is that urban planning, they come to your neighborhood, they do something, they put in a park or light rail or whatever, and they have a community meeting. Well, not many people show up at a community meeting, and usually those only with the most time, the wherewithal, or the biggest gripe. And then if you're cynical, you would say that the urban planner already knows what they want to do, they're just looking to see if there's any opposition. So what's a different way to have a community meeting, or how do you find out what people really want and go to them? So we approach people with chalkboards. So that's sort of an up-to-date what I've done, and you can see how my practice has shifted from documentary, black and white photography to now engaging communities in different ways. And so I've been doing this for 25 years, and now it's called social practice. So any questions? Yeah.
I think that your practice has evolved to relate to social media and the internet and stuff like that.
We really haven't done much with social media. We created this website, but no, I've never really used social media in any of my projects. No. Although it's impacted, I think, like my workshops. And I think that, say, for middle school, how I did with the Chalk Talk workshop, is very difficult for middle school students to interact with someone that they don't know. The teacher has to pair them up. And so I was at a high school, 10th graders. It was very difficult. They did not want to do this. And so I said, why is this a problem? Why is this so hard? He said, well, because I don't know that person. But why is it so hard? Well, because they might find out stuff about me. But why is it so hard? Because if you let people know stuff about you, they can hurt you. And then one kid says, you can tell he was a jock, and he was pretty outspoken. He says, well, because on the battlefield, if you let your enemy know a vulnerability, they can kill you. And what battlefield are you talking about?
the battlefield of high school or social media? He says, yes, there are casualties every day. So I think we live in an era where, you know, if you're at that age, adolescence, it's always difficult. But how more difficult is it with social media? And then are you stronger or weaker if you... So when I told people, I said, so then do you think that everyone's a potential enemy? And they all go like, yeah. I said, really? What if you thought of everyone as a potential friend? And they just started laughing at me. I said, that's stupid. That's unrealistic. That would never happen. And then but you could tell a couple of people say, yeah, well, that would be really, you know, they're trying to imagine that. You know, you walk down the hall and everyone's potential friend. But for the most part, they laughed at me. Any other questions? Yeah.
Did you have difficulty getting permission, or how did you get permission to be able to photograph minors and kids and things like that?
Yeah, for the most part, I talk to the parents. But for everybody, you know, just ask. Yeah, but if they're underage, then I generally talk to the parents. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Did you actually coordinate the showing, like, photographs on Lake Street or whatnot? Was that you were doing, or did you work with people?
Yeah. So you know, I came up with the idea, and then I started applying for grants. And I was fortunate to receive grants to photograph for 4 years, and but then I had to put on the exhibition, and so I started applying for grants for that. So I partnered with a nonprofit so that I could apply for organizational grants. I probably wrote about 20 grants, and received enough to do the project, but you know, photographing thousands of over 4 years is difficult. But putting on the exhibition was nothing compared to putting on the exhibition. The logistics, and then we didn't raise enough money, and so to have 675 photographs printed that big, I was the biggest client of that company for that year. I was getting all these bills, I couldn't pay them, and then it was as exhausting as it was exhilarating. And then we auctioned off the photographs to help pay for the exhibit. And I thought, wow, this is getting so much attention, media, and so on, that we're going to make so much money, I can start a nonprofit. But we didn't even have enough. We had enough to cover most of the costs, but I went into debt. But for the most part, it was my project. And the nonprofit that I worked with, I mean, they were just more of a sponsoring agent. So I had teams of volunteers. You know, I worked with community organizations. I worked with arts organizations, but pretty much it was our project. And so then, 7 years later, doing a project. You know, I'm working with someone who said, "We want you to do a project on University Avenue." It was with Public Arts St. Paul. I said, "No, I don't think so. I mean, I don't have the energy to do something. I can't do it." And then they said they would help support it. And so then I thought, well, maybe if I did, how would I do it? And I'd do it in a different way. So so that was a completely different experience, because I had the support of a very small organization that did a lot and raised the money and was able to get people to drop shipping containers down and all that kind of stuff. All the logistics, the city permits, all that kind of stuff. So. When I was actually exhibiting them, there were just a couple of incidences with my exhibits where someone says, you know, they don't want their photograph shown, or one person says, you know, for whatever reason. But that's pretty minor. For the most part, people are like the opposite. You know, or store owners would say, you know, that person in the photograph, they're here every week with a different group of people. Yeah. Yeah.
When you ask people that
mostly I like a fly on the wall. Mostly hanging out with them. I may suggest that they stand or sit in a place where they normally used to be. I wouldn't tell them how to sit. So I'm mostly reacting. I'm not interested in how things should be. I'm interested in how things are. I was more of a purist, I think, in my earlier projects where I didn't do anything, I didn't touch anything. Now my later projects, so I'm dressing up, I'm doing all different kinds of things. So it's less that, but I never set up a picture.
So the girl that you were with for 3 weeks, you were really just telling her to go about her business when you were in her home project.
Yeah, I would just show up and say, what are you doing today? And I realized how, I think she thought of me as like a teacher or something. She's 15 years old. So I wanted to say, Sean, what do you think about this? I'm photographing her, what do you think about this? That's fine. That's about all she would say to me. Yeah, but I knew she liked it. I knew she didn't want me to know that she liked it. So I was photographing her with her friends, and she lost sight of me. And I heard her say, well, where is he? And then I said, I'm right here, Shalimar. That's the only time I ever saw her get embarrassed. And then, you can't, her teacher said that there's very few Native American girls that graduate. Mostly get pregnant. There's a photo of them. I showed them. Her friends, they're all pregnant. And she had a hard life. Then we had the exhibit. When she came, she brought her family, and then they moved to Standing Rock Reservation. The following year, I took my 9-month road trip. And she would always say things to me like, she was really charismatic. She had really, really fallen off. And she always has to have the last word. She's always surrounded by people, but you always felt that she was kind of alone. And so she would say to me, she would say to people when they said something to her and they complained about something, she would say, oh, boo for you, boo for you. And so on this road trip, she called me. And she just wanted to chat. And she started complaining about something, and I said, well, boo for you. And that's the only time I ever heard her laugh. She didn't get it.
Actually, I have a question about that. Because you showed like an installation that you see some of her objects
Yeah.
that were 40s.
Yeah.
She made herself?
Yep.
Was that like something that you thought of at the beginning of the project, or is that something that inspired like while you were working with her?
It happened during the middle. So in the beginning, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. I wasn't quite sure how it would work. Then I thought, well, I want this to be inside, outside. Right, to have her point of view. And so the first, it wasn't for a month, where I think it was a teacher said, she's a really good scholar. I said, Shelby, what are your poems? And she said, I don't know. I'll try to find them. And finally, after 2 months, she showed me her poems. Just heartbreaking. Maybe heartbreaking in a way that every 15-year-old girl writes about. Some of it was stuff that she experienced that I think most 15-year-old girls don't experience. And so we had to write it on chalk. And she installed those on the wall. Any other questions? Time for dinner? Yeah. Well, again, I have my own biases, my own fears, and so on. And I'm not that friendly. And in my private life, I am not that friendly. I'm not unfriendly. I'm like most people. In my private life, I would walk up to thousands of strangers. This is what I do with the camera on my head. So, it's not like it's gotten easier. I mean, there are periods in between projects where I have to, when I started another project, I have to kind of talk myself into it again. I have to gear myself up, get outside my own bubble. And then once I'm in it, then I'm in it. And then, but it's always, anything can happen. but nothing bad has ever happened, and I never felt I was in danger. But, you know, I mean, I'm pretty aware of what's going on, and there's illegal stuff going on out there. But I've never felt, you know, I've had people ask me, do you think, you know, being who you are, like affects what you do? What do you mean being who I am? And there's someone saying, well, you know, not being white. You know, how do you know? I mean, the thing is, when you approach someone, they've already sized you up, right? By the way you dress, your gender, your attitude, whatever, they size you up. And they've already made a judgment. But as soon as you open your mouth, you can change that. Ultimately, you know, a lot of people aren't going to want you to photograph them no matter who you are. The thing is, you ask enough people are going to say yes. I mean, it's just like sales. You just got to ask enough, a certain amount of people, you know you're going to get a sale. So for me, I think it may be easier or harder depending on my attitude, my gender, my racial identity, but anyone can do this. It may be harder, it may be easier for me. The thing is, if you want to do it, you can do it. It's just walking up.
Do any of like the people who said no, do some of those images still like are like ghost story about what you saw or
No.
what you take from them?
Because there's always people I can photograph. Just move on, get another one. Infinite possibilities. I mean, there's some people where they say, no, I really kind of work a little bit. I really want to photograph them, but for the most part, you know, if they say no, then no. I can kind of tell or I'm talking to somebody if they're going to say yes or no.
That's what I was just asking about that naturally too, or
No. No. You know, I think, I don't know. I mean, you know, I think what I do is still a form of journalism. I mean, I'm curious, I'm stubborn, I'm arrogant. You know, who knows? Who knows why you do what you do? I was talking to another artist, and we both lived in the same building. And I moved into this building to do this project when I was in Malaysia. And she said from her corner window, she could see all sorts of crazy stuff. And I go, wow, really? And she just looked at me, it's just all material for you, isn't it? Time for dinner.
Thank you, guys.
So, great place. There's the website's in the newspaper, and then I have my own website, wingyounghuie.com. If you want to be informed of what I'm doing, you can just email me or friend me on Facebook, and we send out announcements.